You know, this past week I was invited to go see the premiere of a brand new Christian independent low-budget film called Shooting the Prodigal. And since I happen to actually have a YouTube channel where I review Christian movies, I thought, well, why don't I do that? So, here we go. Shooting the Prodigal is a fairly low-budget Christian film. Basically, a story about a pastor who has kind of inherited a church. So his dad was the pastor of this church, he became the pastor, and things are kind of falling apart under his leadership. Now his dad has had this vision of building this huge multi-sports youth center or something. It's very funny what they call it, but I can't remember what they called it in the movie. The point is that the land near the church is owned by this lady who happens to be Jewish. So they go over to the lady's house and they want to ask her if they can purchase the land. And the lady, through a very funny series of events, ends up telling them that they can have the land if they take the money that they were going to use to purchase the land and instead fund an independent church film. The caveat being her film student nephew from New York must be the director. So the rest of the film is spent with this church, kind of in Kendrick Brothers style, attempting to make this film and none of them really knowing what they're doing. Really, the main character of this movie is the guy from New York, kind of a typical story arc, which I don't mind. The guy from the big city has to go out into the boondocks where he's gonna be around all these hicks, but then eventually realizes that these people have changed his life, he cares about them. As I've said before, I would much rather a Christian movie take a known and used story arc and kind of apply its own spin to it, rather than many of the movies that I've reviewed that seem to have no clue what their identity even is. Now, I will give you a heads up. This movie is an independent film. So I personally didn't really go into it with very high expectations because I didn't know anything about it whenever I went in. I just had some friends. They were like, hey, you wanna go see this Christian movie? We know you love Christian movies so much. And I was like, all right, well, I'll give it a shot. I went in and I gotta say, I actually laughed quite a bit during this movie. I was not expecting what this movie gave me. And what it gave me was a movie that in a way kind of parodies the tendency right now for like mega churches to fund and create their own films. You know, it's not very easy to pull off a Christian movie. On top of that, it's very difficult to pull off an actually funny Christian movie and for it not to feel awkward, uncomfortable, trying to be funny, but also like they're not able to go there because there's so many people in their target audience that they can't offend. However, this movie seemed to pull it off very well. Part of that is because even though it's a comedy, they didn't make all of the characters very cartoony. Like the non-Christians are just normal people. The Christians, they're not like, oh, I'm a Christian. It's not making fun of Christians. If you've ever been to a Southern Baptist church, you've met these people. The pastor especially is a very relatable character because you see his struggle. He genuinely has this caring and compassionate heart for his community and his congregation, even when he has this pressure from people who are in charge of him and funding their church to not be that way. Since the director of the movie, within the movie, you know, the kid from New York, isn't a Christian, the pastor throughout the movie feels this obligation to try to lead him to the Lord. There's this one part where he gives this string of Christianisms. Sir, if you were to die today, do you know where you would go? I just want to bless you, bring you into the fold, encourage you to follow in the path and lead you beside green pastures. And the Jewish New York kid is sitting there like, what are you talking about? And I couldn't believe it. After I finished seeing the film, I got to meet the director. Super nice guy. It apparently is his first time directing a film. I was very shocked. There were things in this movie that I felt were gonna kind of go into like Christian awkwardness, and it didn't. And those are mistakes that any first-time director could have made, typically make, and this guy didn't. I was very impressed. At its heart and its core, this is kind of an analysis of the Christian film industry, which is something that I do. And I have to believe that much of what happens in this movie actually comes from personal experience, and because of that, it makes it very relatable, self-aware, and organic to the story. Now, I've gone on and on about this movie as if it is the best movie in the world, I suppose, and unfortunately, it does have a few problems. First thing, it suffers a little bit from what a lot of Christian movies do, having jokes that just go on a little long and are awkward and just aren't that funny. There's this one character in the movie who has this goat, and yeah, it's funny that there's a goat, but in a movie that is such a critique of kind of like real church culture, a guy walking around with a goat in church was just something that seemed a little far-fetched. Maybe it really happens, but it just seemed a little too forced for my taste. Another thing I didn't like was the girl character. There's a love interest, not because there was a love interest, that's fine with me, I don't have a problem with that, but she wasn't that great of an actress. actress, and so it was a little distracting. The main character was actually a pretty good actor. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Jake Gyllenhaal a bit. So to see him in scenes with the girl who's in the movie and him really kind of nail it and her not so much, it was a little distracting and kind of brought the movie down. Plus, I think her entire character was a little bit unnecessary. They could have replaced her character and some of the exposition that happened because of her character with like somebody else. Also, her character led to several like misunderstandings that could have easily been resolved but weren't. There were enough other misunderstandings in the movie that it kind of led nowhere. It was just one extra element that was unnecessary for the movie that probably would have just made this movie a lot better. But I think the biggest thing that hurts this movie is just the low budget. Unfortunately, this is a pretty good script that if it was given a stronger treatment, then it probably would have brought it up and they would have fixed some of those things. But I certainly do recommend you guys see this movie. Now, again, go into it understanding what kind of movie this is. Had a low budget, first time director, Christian movie. If you do, then I think you'll find it very charming, realizing that you've seen a movie that has a lot of heart, a great message that if you watch and enjoy my reviews, then I believe you'll resonate with. I put a link to their website down below, and I'll probably post on my Twitter whenever it's out, because apparently it's going to be coming out on DVD and you'll be able to pick it up. You can check that website and then you'll learn all about it. With all that being said, I am going to give this movie a 60%. All right, guys, thanks so much for checking out this episode of my movie review videos. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for all the positive feedback. My last video, which there's a link right there, was kind of my new series called Voiceover. Go and check that out and enjoy that if you want, and I'll do more of those, but I'll also do movie reviews and that sort of thing. If you like all of the things that I do on this channel and you want to see more and you want to keep it going, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/saygoodnightkev. Two people who give to that, Brendan Neely and Westminster Effects. Check out Westminster Effects, definitely a place you should go if you play guitar, because he has custom guitar pedals. They're really great. That's all I gotta say for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. Good night.